Snorro, indeed, in the quietest manner, almost in a brief business style, writes down in his Heimskringla how Odin was a heroic prince in the Black Sea region with 12 peers and a great people straitened for room. How he led these Asen, the Asiatics, of people of his out of Asia, settled them in the north parts of Europe by warlike conquest, invented letters, poetry, and so forth, and came by and by to be worshipped as chief god by these Scandinavians, his 12 peers made into 12 sons of his own, gods like himself. Snorro has no doubt of this. Saxo Grammaticus, a very curious Northman of the same century, is still more unhesitating, scruples not to find out a historical fact in every individual mythos, and writes it down as a terrestrial event in Denmark or elsewhere. Torpheus learned and cautioned some centuries later, assigns by calculation a date for it. Odin, he says, came to Europe about the year 70 before Christ, of all which, grounded on mere uncertainties found to be untenable now, I need say nothing. Far, very beyond the year 70. Odin's date, adventures, whole terrestrial history, figures, and environment are sunk from us now forever into unknown thousands of years. Nay, Grimm, the German antiquary, goes so far as to deny that any man Odin ever existed. He proves it by etymology. The word Wotan, which is the original form of Odin, a word spread as the name of the chief divinity over all the Teutonic nations everywhere. This word, which connects itself, according to Grimm, with the Latin vadere and with the English wade and such like, means primarily movement, source of movement, power, and is the fit name of the highest god, not of any man. The word signifies divinity, he says, among the Old Saxon, German, and all the Teutonic nations. The adjectives formed from it all signify divine, supreme, or something pertaining to the chief god. Like enough. We must bow to Grimm in matters etymological. Let us consider how it fixes that Wotan means wading, force of movement, and now still what hinders it from being the name of a heroic man and mover as well as of a god. As for adjectives and words formed from it, did not the Spaniards, in their universal admiration for lope, get in the habit of saying a lope flower, a lope dama, if the flower or woman were of surpassing beauty? Had this lasted, lope would have grown in Spain to be an adjective signifying godlike also. Indeed, Adam Smith, in his essay on language, surmises that all adjectives whatsoever were formed precisely in that way. Some very green thing, chiefly notable for its greenness, got the appellative name green, and then the next thing remarkable for that quality, a tree, for instance, was named the green tree. As we still say, the steam couch, four-horse coach, or the like. All primary adjectives, according to Smith, were formed in this way, were at first substantive things. We cannot annihilate a man for etymologies like that. Surely there was a first teacher and captain. Surely there must have been an Odin, palpable to a sense at one time. No adjective, but a real hero of flesh and blood, the voice of all tradition, history, or echo of history, agrees with that thought, and will teach one about it to assure us of this. How about the man Odin came to be considered a god, the chief god? That surely is a question which nobody would wish to dogmatize upon. I have said his people know no limits to their admiration of him. They had as yet no scale to measure admiration by. Fancy your own generous heart's love of some greatest man expanding till it transcended all bounds, till it filled and overflowed the whole field of your thought. Or what if this man Odin, since a great deep soul with the afflation and mysterious tide of vision and impulse rushing on him, he knows not whence, is ever an enigma, a kind of terror and wonder to himself, should have felt that he perhaps was divine, that perhaps he was some effluence of the Wutan movement, supreme power and divinity, of whom his rapt vision of all nature was the awful flame image, that some effluence of Wutan dwelt in him. He was not necessarily false, but he was mistaken. Speaking the truest, he knew. A great soul, any sincere soul, knows not what he is, alternates between the highest height and the lowest depth, can of all things the least measure himself. What others take him for, and what he guesses that he may be, these two items strangely act on one another, help to determine one another. With all men reverently admiring him, with his own wild soul full of noble ardours and affections, of whirlwind chaotic darkness and glorious new light, a divine universe bursting all into godlike beauty around him, and no man to whom the like had ever befallen, who could he think himself to be? Wutan? All men answered, Wutan. And then consider what mere time will do in such cases. How, if a man was great while living, he becomes a tenfold greater when dead. What an enormous camera obscura magnifier is tradition. How a thing grows in the human memory, in the human imagination, when love, worship, and all that lie in the human heart is there to encourage it. And in the darkness, in the entire ignorance, without date or document, no book, no Arundel marble, only here and there some dumb momentary cairn. Why in 30 or 40 years were there no books any great man would grow mythic, the contemporaries who had seen him being once all dead, and in 300 years and in 3,000 years? To attempt theorizing on such matters would profit little. They are matters which refuse to be theoremed and diagrammed, which logic ought to know that she cannot speak of. Enough for us to discern far in the utmost distance some gleam as of some small real light shining in the center of that enormous camera obscura image, to discern that at the center of it all was not a madness and nothing, but a sanity and something. This light kindled in the great dark vortex of the Norse mind, dark but living, waiting only for light. This is to me the center of the whole. How such light will then shine out and with wondrous thousandfold expansion spread itself in forms and colors depends not on it so much as on the national mind recipient of it. The colors and forms of your light will be those of the glass cut it has to shine through. Curious to think how for every man any the truest fact is modelled by nature of the man. I said the earnest man, speaking to his brother men, must always have stated what seemed to him a fact, a real appearance of nature. But the way in which such appearance or fact shaped itself, what sort of fact it became for him, was and is modified by his own laws of thinking, deep, subtle, but universal, ever operating laws. The world of nature for every man is the fantasy of himself. This world is the multiplex image of his own dream. Who knows to what unnameable subtleties of spiritual law all these pagan fables owe their shape? The number 12, divisiblest of all, which could be halved, quartered, parted in 3 into 6, the most remarkable number. This was enough to determine the signs of the zodiac, the number of Odin's sons, and innumerable other 12s. Any vague rumor of number had a tendency to settle itself into 12. So with regard to every other matter, and quite unconsciously too, with no notion of building up allegories. But the fresh, clear glance of those first ages would be prompt in discerning the secret relation of the things and wholly open to obey these. Schiller finds in the cestus of Venus an everlasting aesthetic truth as to the nature of all beauty, curious, but he is careful not to insinuate that the old Greek mystics had any notion of learning about the philosophy of criticism. On the whole, we must leave these boundless regions. Cannot we consider that Odin was a reality? Error indeed, error enough, but sheer falsehood, idle fables, allegory of forethought. We will not believe that our fathers believed in these. Odin's runes are a significant feature of him. Runes and the miracles of magic that he worked by them make a great feature in the tradition. Runes are Scandinavian alphabet. Suppose Odin to have been the inventor of letters as well as magic among the people. It is the greatest invention man ever made. This of marking down the unseen thought that is in him by writing characters. It is a kind of second speech, almost as miraculous as the first. You remember the astonishment and incredulity of Atahualpa, the Peruvian king, how he made the Spanish soldier who was guarding him scratch Dio on his thumbnail, that he might try the next soldier with it to ascertain whether such a miracle was possible. If Odin brought letters among his people, he might work magic enough. Writing by runes has some air of being original among the Norsemen, not a Phoenician alphabet, but a native Scandinavian one. Snorro tells us further that Odin invented poetry, the music of human speech, as well as that miraculous runic marking of it. Transport yourself into the early childhood of nations, the first beautiful morning light of our Europe, when all lay in fresh young radiance, as of a great sunrise, and our Europe was first beginning to think to be. Wonder, hope, infinite radiance of hope and wonder, as of a young child's thoughts in hearts of these strong men, strong sons of nature. And here was not only a wild captain and fighter, discerning with his wild flashing eyes what can do, with his wild lion heart daring and doing it, but a poet too. All that we are meant by a poet, all that we mean by a poet, prophet, great devout thinker and inventor, as truly a great man ever is. A hero is a hero at all, is a hero at all points, in the soul and thought of him first of all. This Odin, in his rude, semi-articulate way, had a word to speak, a great heart laid open to take in this great universe, and man's life here, and utter a great word about it. A hero, as I say, in his own rude manner, a wise, gifted, noble-hearted man. And now, if we still admire such a man beyond all others, what must these wild Norse souls, first awakened into thinking, have made of him? To them, as yet without names for it, he was noble and noblest. Hero, prophet, God, Wotan, the greatest of all. Thought is thought, however it speak or spell itself. Intrinsically, I conjecture this: Odin must have been of the same sort of stuff as the greatest kinds of men, a great thought in the wild, deep heart of him. The rough words he articulated, are they not rudimentary roots of those English words we still use? He worked so in that obscure element, but he was a light kindled in it, a light of intellect, rude nobleness of heart, the only kind of light we have yet. A hero, as I say, and he had to shine there and make his own obscure element a little lighter, as is still a task of us all. We will fancy him to be the type Norseman, the finest Teuton, whom that race had yet produced. The rude Norse heart burst up into boundless admiration around him, into adoration. He is as a root of so many things. The fruit of him is found growing from deep thousands of years over the whole field of Teutonic life. Our own Wednesday, as I said, is it not still Odin's day? Wednesbury, Wansbury, Wanstead, Wandsworth. Odin grew into England too. These are still leaves from that root. He was the chief god to all the Teutonic people, their pattern Norsemen. In such a way did they admire their pattern Norsemen. That was the fortune he had in the world. Thus, if the man Odin himself had vanished utterly, there is a huge shadow of him which still projects itself over the whole history of his people. For this Odin, once admitted to be a god, we can understand well that the whole Scandinavian scheme of nature, or dim no scheme, whatever it might before have been, would now begin to develop itself altogether differently and grow thenceforth in a new manner. What this Odin saw into and taught with his runes and his rhymes, the whole Teutonic people laid to heart and carried forward. His way of thought became their way of thought. Such, under new conditions, is the history of every great thinker still. In gigantic, confused lineaments, like some enormous camera obscura shadow thrown upward from the dead deeps of the past and covering the whole northern haven, is not that Scandinavian mythology in some sort the portraiture of this man Odin? The gigantic image of his natural face, legible or not, legible there, expanded and confused in this manner. Thought, I say, is always thought. No great man lives in vain. The history of the world is but the biography of great men. To me, there is something very touching in this primeval figure of heroism, in such artless, helpless, but hearty, entire reception of a hero by his fellow men. Never so helpless in shape, it is the noblest of feelings, and a feeling in some shape or other perennial as a man himself. If I could show in any measure what I felt deeply for a long time now, that is, the vital element of manhood, the soul of man's history here in our world, it would be the chief use of this discoursing at present. We do not now call our great men gods, nor admire without limit. I know with limit enough, but if we have no great men, or do not admire at all, that was still a worst case. This poor Scandinavian hero worship, that whole Norse way of looking at the universe and adjusting oneself there, has an indestructible merit for us. A rude, childlike way of recognizing the divineness of nature, the divineness of man, most rude, yet heartfelt, robust, giant-like, betokening what a giant of a man this child would yet grow to. It was a truth, and is none. It is not as the half-dumb, stifled voice of the long-buried generations of our own fathers, calling out of the depth of ages to us, in whose veins their blood still runs. This, then, this is what we made of the world. This is all the image and notion we could form to ourselves of this great mystery of a life and universe. Despise it not. You are raised high above it, to large free scope of vision, but you too are yet at the top. No, your notion too is so much enlarged, is but a partial, imperfect one. That matter is a thing no man will ever, in time or out of time, comprehend. After thousands of years of ever new expansion, man will find himself but struggling to comprehend again a part of it. The thing is larger, shall man not to be comprehended by him, an infinite thing. The essences of the Scandinavian, as indeed of all pagan mythologies, we found to be recognition of the divineness of nature, sincere communication of man with the mysteries, invisible powers visibly seen at work in the world round him. This, I should say, is more sincerely done in the Scandinavian than in any mythology I know. Sincerity is the great characteristic of it. Superior sincerity, far superior, consoles us for the total want of old Grecian grace. Sincerity, I think, is better than grace. I feel that these old Northmen were looking into nature with open eye and soul, most earnest, honest, childlike, and yet manlike, with a great-hearted simplicity in depth and freshness, in true loving, admiring, and unfearing way. A right, valiant, true old race of men. Such recognition of nature one finds to be the chief element of paganism. Recognition of man and his moral duty, though this too is not wanting, comes to be the chief element only in purer forms of religion. Here indeed is a great distinction and epoch in human beliefs, a great landmark in the religious development of mankind. Man first puts himself in relation with nature and her powers, wonders and worships over all these. Not till a later epoch does he discern that all power is moral, that the grand point is the distinction for him of good and evil, of thou shalt and thou shalt not. With regard to all these fabulous delineations in the Edda, I will remark, moreover, as indeed was already hinted, that most probably they must have been of a much newer date, most probably even from the first, were comparatively idle for the old Norsemen. And it was a kind of poetic sport. Allegory and poetic delineation, as I said above, cannot be religious faith. The faith itself must first be there, then allegory enough will gather round it, as the fit body round the soul. The Norse faith, I can well suppose, like other faiths, was most active while it lay mainly in the silent state and had not yet much to say about itself, and still less to sing. Among those shadowy Edda matters, amid all that fantastic congeries of assertions and traditions in their musical mythologies, the main practical belief a man could have was probably not much more than this: of the Valkyrs and the Hall of Odin, of an inflexible destiny, and that the one thing needful of a man was to be brave. The Valkyrs are choosers of the slain, a destiny inexorable, which it is useless trying to bend or soften, has appointed who is to be slain. This was a fundamental point for the Norse believer, as indeed it is for all honest men everywhere. For a Mahomet, a Luther, for a Napoleon too, it lies at the basis, this for every such man. It is the woof out of which his whole system of thought is woven. The Valkyrs, and then that these choosers led the brave to a heavenly hall of Odin, only the base and slavish being thrust elsewhere into a realm of Hela, the death goddess. I take this to have been the soul of the whole Norse belief. They understood in their hearts that it was indispensable to be brave, that Odin would have no favor for them, but despise and thrust them out if they were not brave. Consider, too, whether there is not something in this. It is an everlasting duty, valid in our day, as in that, the duty of being brave. Valor is still value. The first duty for a man is still that of subduing fear. We must get rid of fear. We cannot act at all till then. A man's acts are slavish, not true but specious. His very thoughts are false. He thinks too as a slave and coward, till he have got fear under his feet. Odin's creed, if we disentangle the real kernel of it, is true to this hour. A man shall and must be valiant. He must march forward and quit himself like a man, trusting imperturbably in the appointment and choice of the upper powers, and on the whole not fear at all. Now and always the completeness of his victory over fear will determine how much of a man he is. It is doubtless very savage, that kind of valour of the old Northmen. Snorro tells us that they thought it a shame and misery not to die in battle, and if natural death seemed to be coming on, they would cut wounds in the flesh that Odin might receive them as warriors slain. Old kings about to die had their bodies laid to a ship. The ship set forth with sails set and slow fire burning in it, that once at sea it might blaze up in a flame, and in such manner bury worthily the old hero. At once in the sky and in the ocean. Wild, bloody valor, yet valor of its kind. Better, I say, than none. In the old sea kings, too, what an indomitable, rugged energy. Silent with closed lips, as I fancy them, unconscious that they were specially brave, defying the wild oceans with its monsters, and all men and things, progenitors of our own Blakes and Nelsons. No Homer sang these Norse sea kings, but Agamemnon was a small audacity and of small fruit in the world, or to some of them. To Hrolf of Normandy, for instance, Hrolf or Rollo, Duke of Normandy, the wild sea king, has a share in governing England at this hour. Nor was it altogether nothing, even that wild sea roving and battling through so many generations. It needed to be ascertained which was the strongest kind of men, who were to be ruler over whom. Among the Northland sovereigns, too, I find some who got the title woodcutter, forest felling kings. Much lie in that. I suppose at the bottom of many of them were forest fellers as well as fighters. Those skalds talk mainly of the latter, misleading certain critics not a little, for no nation of men could ever live by fighting alone. There could not produce enough come out of that. There could not produce enough come out of that. I suppose the right good fighter was oftenest also the right good forest fella, the right good improver, discerner, doer, and worker of every kind, for true value, different enough from ferocity, is the basis of all. A more legitimate kind of valor that, showing itself against the untamest forests and dark brute powers of nature to conquer nature for us, in the same direction, have not we, their descendants, since carried it far? May such valor last forever with us. That the man Odin, speaking with a hero's voice and heart, as with an impressiveness out of heaven, told his people the infinite importance of valor, how man thereby became a god, and that his people, feeling a response to it in their own hearts, believed this message of his, and thought it a message out of heaven, and him a divinity for telling it them. This seems to me the primary seed grain of the Norse religion, from which all manner of mythologies, symbolic practices, speculations, allegories, songs, and sagas would naturally grow. Grow, how strangely! I called it a small light shining and shaping in the huge vortex of Norse darkness. Yet the darkness itself was alive. Consider that. It was the eager, inarticulate, uninstructed mind of the whole Norse people, longing only to become articulate, to go on articulating even further. The living doctrine grows like a banyan tree. The first seed is the essential thing. Any branch strikes itself down into the earth, becomes a new root, and so in endless complexity, we have a whole wood, a whole jungle, one seed, the parent of it all. Was not the whole Norse religion accordingly, in some sense, what we call the enormous shadow of this man's likeness? Critics trace some affinity in some North Methuses of creation and such like with those of the Hindus. The cow, a dumbler, licking the rime from the rocks, has a kind of Hindu look. A Hindu cow transported into frosty countries, probable enough. Indeed, we may say undoubtedly, these things will have a kindred with the remotest lands, with the earliest times. Thought does not die, but only is changed. The first man that began to think in this planet of ours, he was the beginner of all. And then the second man and the third man, nay, every true thinker to this hour, is a kind of Odin, teaches men his way of thought, spreads a shadow of his own likeness over sections of the history of the world. Of the distinctive poet character or merit of this North mythology, I have not room to speak, nor does it concern me much. Some wild prophecies we have, as the Voluspa of the elder Uda, of a rapt, earnest, Sibylline sort. But they were comparatively an idle adjunct of the matter, men who, as it were, but toyed with the matter. These later skalds, it is their song chiefly that survive. In later centuries, I suppose they would go on singing poetically, symbolizing as our modern painters paint when it was no longer from the inmost heart, or not from any heart at all. This is everywhere to be kept in mind. Gray's fragments of Norse lore, at any rate, will give one no notion of it, any more than the Pope will of Homer. It is no square-built, gloomy palace of black ashlar marble, shrouded in awe and horror, as Gray gives it to us. No, rough as the North rocks, as the Iceland desert, it is with a heartiness and homeliness, even a tint of good humour and robust mirth in the middle of these fearful things. The strong old North heart did not go up upon theatrical sublimities. They had not time to tremble. I like much of their robust simplicity, their veracity, directness and conception. Thor draws down his brows in veritable Norse rage, grasps his hammer till the knuckles grow white. Beautiful traits of pity too, an honest pity. Balder the white god dies in the beautiful benignant. He is the sun god. They try all nature for a remedy, but he is dead. Frigga, his mother, sends Hermodr to seek or see him. 9 days and 9 nights he rides through gloomy deep valleys, a labyrinth of gloom, arrives at the bridge with its gold roof. The keeper says, yes, Balder did pass here, but the kingdom of the dead is down yonder, far towards the north. Hermodr rides on, leaps Helga's gate, does not see Balder, and speak with him. Balder cannot be delivered. Inexorable. Hela will not, for Odin or any god will give him up. The beautiful and gentle has to remain there. His wife had volunteered to go with him, to die with him. They shall remain there forever. He sends his ring to Odin. Nanna, his wife, sends her thimble to Frigga as remembrance. Ah me. For indeed Valor is the mountain of pity too, of truth, and all that is great and good in man. The robust, homely vigour of the Norse heart attaches one much in these delineations. It is not a trait of right honest strength, says Uhland, who has written a fine essay on Thor, that the old Norse heart finds its friend in the thunder god. That it is not frightened away by his thunder, but finds that summer heat, the beautiful noble summer, must and will have thunder withal. The Norse heart loves this Thor, and his hammerbolt, sports with him. Thor is summer heat, the god of peaceable industry as well as thunder. He is the peasant's friend. His true henchman and attendant is Thialfi, manual labour. Thor himself engages in all manner of rough manual work, scorns no business for its plebeianism, is ever and anon travelling the country of the Jotuns, harrying those chaotic frost monsters, subduing them, at least straightening and damaging them. There is a great broad humour in some of these things. Thor, as we saw above, goes to Jotunland to seek Hymir's cauldron, that the gods may brew beer. Hymir, the huge giant, enters, his grey beard all full of hoarfrost, splits pillars with the very glance of his eye. Thor, after much rough tumult, snatches the pot, clasps it on his head, the handles of it reach down to his heels. The The Norse skald has a kind of loving sport with Thor. This is the Hymir whose cattle, the critics have discovered, are icebergs. Huge, untutored Brobdingnag's genius, needing only to be tamed down into Shakespeare's, Dante's, Goethe's. It is all gone now, that old Norse work. Thor the thunder god changed into Jack the giant killer. But the mind that made it is here yet. How strangely things grow and die, and do not die. There are twigs of that great world tree of Norse belief, still curiously traceable. This poor Jack of the nursery, with his miraculous shoes of swiftness, coat of darkness, sword of sharpness, he is one. Hind Etin, and still more descriptively, Red Etin of Ireland in the Scottish ballads. These are both derived from Norseland. Etin is evidently a Jotun. Nay, Shakespeare's Hamlet is a twig too of this same world tree. There seems no doubt of that. Hamlet, Amleth, I find, is really a mythic personage. And his tragedy of the poisoned father, poisoned asleep by drops in his ear, and the rest, is a North mythos. Old Saxon, as his wont was, made it a Danish history of Shakespeare. Shakespeare out of Saxo made it what we see, that is, a twig of the world tree that has grown, I think, by nature or accident that one has grown. In fact, these old Norse songs have a truth in them, an inward, perennial truth and greatness, as indeed all must have that can very long preserve itself by tradition alone. It is a greatness not of mere body and gigantic bulk, but a rude greatness of soul. There is a sublime, uncomplaining melancholy traceable through these old hearts, a great free glance into the very deeps of thought. They seem to have seen, these brave old Norsemen, what meditation has taught all men in all ages, that this world is, after all, but a show, a phenomenon or appearance, no real thing. All deep souls see into that, the Hindu mythologist, the German philosopher, the Shakespeare, the earnest thinker, whereof he may be. We are such stuff as dreams are made of. One of Thor's expeditions to Utgard, the outer garden, central seat of Jotunland, is remarkable in this respect. Thialfi was with him and Loki. After various adventures, they entered upon giant land, wandered over plains, wild uncultivated places, among stones and trees. At nightfall they noticed a house, and as the door, which indeed formed one whole side of the house, was opened, they entered. It was a simple habituation, one large hall, altogether empty. They stayed there. Suddenly, in the dead of night, loud noises alarmed them. Thor grasped his hammer, stood in the door, prepared for fight. His companions within ran hither and thither in their terror, seeking some outlet in that rude hall. They found a little closet at last and took refuge there. Neither had Thor any battle, for lo, in the morning it turned out that the noise had been only the snoring of a certain enormous but peaceable giant, the giant Skrimir, who lay peaceably sleeping by. And this that they took for a house was merely his glove, thrown aside there. The door was the glove wrist. The little closet they had fled into was the thumb. Such a glove! I remarked too that it had not fingers as ours have, but only a thumb, and the rest undivided, a most ancient rustic glove. Skrimir now carried their portmanteau all day. Thor, however, had his own suspicions, did not like the ways of Skrimir, determined at night to put an end to him as he slept. Raising his hammer, he struck down into the giant's face a right thunderbolt, blow of force to rend rocks. The giant merely awoke, rubbed his cheek, and said, "Did a leaf fall?" Again Thor struck, so soon as Skrymir again slept, a better blow than before. But the giant only murmured, "Was that a grain of sand?" Thor's third stroke was with both his hands, the knuckles white, I suppose, and seemed to dint deep into Skrymir's visage. But he merely checked his snore and remarked, "There must be sparrows roosting in this tree, I think. What is it that they have dropped?" At the gate of Utgard, a place so high that you had to strain your neck bending back to see the top of it, Skrymir went his way. Thor and his companions were admitted, invited to take share in the games going on. To Thor, for his part, they handed a drinking horn. It was a common feat, they told him, to drink this dry in one draught. Long and fiercely, 3 times over, Thor drank, but he made hardly an impression. He was a weak child, they told him. Could he lift that cat he saw there? Small as the feat seemed, Thor, with his whole godlike strength, could not. He bent up upon the creature's back and could not raise his feet off the ground. Could, at the utmost, raise 1 foot. "Why, you are no man," said the Utgard people. "There is an old woman that will wrestle you." Thor, heartily ashamed, seized this haggard old woman, but could not throw her. And now on their quitting Utgard, the chief Jotun, escorting them politely a little way, said to Thor, "You are beaten then, yet be not so ashamed. There was deception of appearance in it. That horn you tried to drink was the sea. You did make it ebb, but who could drink it bottomless? The cat you would have lifted, why that is the Midgard snake, the great world serpent which, tails in mouth, girds and keeps up the whole created world. Had you torn that up, the world might have been rushed to ruin. As for the old woman, she was time, old age, duration. With her what can wrestle? No man nor god with her. Gods or men, she prevails over all. And then these 3 strokes you struck. Look at these 3 valleys. Your 3 strokes made these." Thor looked at his attendant Jotun. It was Skrymir. It was, say Norse critics, the old chaotic rocky earth in person. And that glove house was some earth cavern. But Skrymir had vanished. Utgard, with its sky-high gates, when Thor grasped his hammer to smite them, had gone to air. Only the giant's voice was heard mocking, "Better come no more to Jotunheim." This is of the allegorical period, as we see, and half play, not of the prophetic and entirely devout, but as mythos. Is there not real antique Norse gold in it? More true metal, rough from some myrstly, than in many a famed Greek mythos, shaped far better. A great, broad, brobdignan grin of true humour is this Skrymir, mirth resting on earnestness and sadness, as the rainbow on black tempest. Only a right valiant heart is capable of that. It is the grim humour of our own Ben Jonson, a rare old Ben, runs in the blood of us, I fancy, for as one catches tones of it under still another shape out of the American Blackwoods. That is also a very striking conception, that of the Ragnarok consummation, or twilight of the gods, it is the Volspa song, seemingly a very old prophetic idea. The gods and Jotuns, the divine powers and the chaotic brute ones, after long contest and partial victory by the former, meet at last in universal world-embracing wrestle and duel. World serpent against Thor, strength against strength, mutually extinctive and ruin, twilight sinking into darkness swallows the entire created universe. The old universe with its gods is sunk, but it is not final death. There is to be a new heaven and a new earth, a higher supreme God, and justice to reign among men. Curious, this law of mutation, which also is a law written in man's inmost thoughts, had been deciphered by these old earnest thinkers in their rude style. And how through all dies, and even gods die, yet all death is but a phoenix fire death, and new birth into the greater and the better. It is the fundamental law of being, for a creature made of time, living in this place of hope. All earnest men have seen into it, may still see into it. And now connected with this, let us glance at the last mythos of the appearance of Thor and end there. I fancy it to be the latest in date of all these fables, a sorrowing protest against the advance of Christianity, set forth reproachfully by some conservative pagan. King Olaf has been harshly blamed for his overzeal in introducing Christianity. Surely I should have blamed him far more for an underzeal in that. He paid dear enough for it. He died by the revolt of his pagan people in battle in the year 1033 at Stickelstad, near the Dromthium, where the chief cathedral of the north has now stood for many centuries, dedicated gratefully to his memory as Saint Olaf. The mythos about Thor is to this effect. King Olaf, the Christian reform king, is sailing with fit escort along the shore of Norway from haven to haven, dispensing justice or doing other royal work on leaving a certain haven. It is found that a stranger of grave eyes and aspect, red beard, of stately robust figure, has stepped in. The courtiers address him. His answer surprises by the pertinency and depth. At length he is brought to the king. The stranger's conversation here is not less remarkable as they sail along the beautiful shore. But after some time, he addresses King Olaf thus. Yes, King Olaf, it is all beautiful with the sun shining on it there. Green, fruitful, a right fair home for you, and many a sore day had Thor. Many a wild fight with the rock Jotuns before he could make it so. And now you seem minded to put away Thor. King Olaf, have a care, said the stranger, drawing down his brows, and when they looked again, he was nowhere to be found. This is the last appearance of Thor on the stage of this world. Do we not see well enough how the fable might arise without unveracity on the part of any one? It is the way most gods have come to appear among men. Thus, if in Pindar's time Neptune was seen once at the Nemeus gates, what was this Neptune too but a stranger of noble grave aspect, fit to be seen? There is something pathetic, tragic for me in this last voice of paganism. Thor is vanished. The whole Norse world has vanished and will not return ever again. In like fashion to that pass away the highest things. All things that have been in the world, all things that are or will be, have to vanish. We have our sad farewell to give them. That Norse religion, a rude but earnest, sternly impressive consecration of valor, so we may define it, sufficed for these old valiant Northmen. Consecration of valor is not a bad thing. We will take it for good so far as it goes. Neither is there no use in knowing something about this old paganism of our fathers. Unconsciously, and combined with higher things, it is in us yet that old faith withal. To know it consciously brings us closer and clearer and more clearly in relation with the past, with our own possessions in the past. For the whole past, as I keep repeating, is the true possession of the present, and the past had always something true, and is a precious possession. In a different time, in a different place, it is always some other side of our common human nature that has been developing itself. The actual true is the sum of all these. Not any one of them by itself constitutes what human nature is, hitherto developed. Better to know them all than misknow them. To which of these three religions do you specially adhere? Inquires the Meister of his teacher. To all the three, answers the other. To all the three, for they by their union first constitute the true religion.